Hey everyone, Kaitlin here. Welcome back to another episode of Baldwin Breakdowns, where we're looking at big concepts, big ideas, and lots of big feelings in less than 10 minutes. And so today I'm going to be talking about assertive communication. I've done a previous video on the 4 different types of communication. I'm going to go through that in the next slide, but this is a little bit more in-depth and I guess kind of a how-to video on how to assertively communicate. So just a very quick refresher, these are the 4 different styles of communication, and because I've done a video on it, I'll link it probably there. Assertive, the difference between assertive communication and these other types is that assertive remains respectful and calm. It asserts your needs while also respecting and understanding the needs of the other person. So whereas some of the other styles might be a little more dismissive or not focus on our needs as much, assertive communication does really assert what it is that you are asking for, requiring, needing in that moment from that other person, but it remains respectful and understanding. And most importantly, amongst this, there is some room to compromise. So I'm going to go through the formula in a few minutes, but when it comes to kind of what we're specifically asking for or requesting, we do need to be prepared for some compromise when we're communicating assertively, because we can't just like demand whatever it is that we're asking for, if that makes sense. So just to go through some common mistakes first, some of the things, or I guess what it all really boils down to is that often in moments of conflict, and conflict is a very, very broad term for any times when maybe one person's needs aren't being met, or there is a disagreement or anything like that. Usually in any type of conflict, both parties, or if there's multiple people, will get defensive and we'll kind of have our guard up. We'll have these protective mechanisms where maybe we shut down a little bit more, or we start only hearing stuff that confirms our beliefs about what's happening. We might get very, very locked in on our perspective. We might start yelling and get very aggressive. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen when conflict comes up, and a lot of it boils down to these ways that we protect ourselves. So one of the most common mistakes is if we start with blame, and that can be kind of pointing out directly what we think the other person did wrong, or what we're requesting of them. So we might start with, I need you to apologize because you did this, or you did this, and then blah, blah, and we'll kind of go into the explanation of how it impacted us afterwards. But when we start with a blaming statement, it immediately puts that person on the defensive, and it becomes that much harder for them to be willing to actually hear and understand your perspective because their guards are up. And that's not the case for everyone, but most of the time people will be a little bit more defensive, or a lot more defensive, if you start with blame. Another big piece is that we leave love and connection out of it. So if we're having conversations with people in our life, in most instances there is some sort of connection, care, and importance or significance in that relationship. And so there are some where this doesn't always fit, like maybe with colleagues or with classmates, but for the most part we are in relationships where ultimately we want to connect, and we want to connect effectively, and that's really what assertive communication is about. It's letting 2 people or multiple people communicate effectively with each other. And so again, coming back to that defensiveness that we often have, it stops us from kind of remembering that, okay, we're doing this out of love. We're doing this because we want to connect with this person better, or we want to connect with them more, or whatever it is. And so when we kind of leave that piece out of the equation, it becomes very difficult to remember where our priorities are. And then the last common mistake that often happens is being very vague or unclear about your needs. And this also applies to being very vague or unclear about what the other person may have done. So there's a very big difference between saying, when you ignored me, versus, when you ignored me as I crossed you, or when you didn't like wave to me as I crossed you on the street. One is very, very vague, and the other person can kind of refute or rebuttal, whereas another is very specific. This is kind of a bad example, but being very vague means that the other person is, one, possibly going to argue it back, but two, they don't actually have concrete evidence or like concrete specific feedback on what it is that you're asking for them to change. So those are some of the most common mistakes that I hear about, that I see, and that I help people work on when we're talking about communication. But so looking at a formula for communicating assertively, this is a formula that I've used for so many years now, and it can be adapted, but the bare bones of it make a lot of sense. So the very first thing that you're going to open up with is I feel, and what needs to come next is an emotion. And so this can be difficult if you don't have a lot of experience noticing or labeling your emotions. But we often say I feel, and then, I feel like you ignored me. I feel like you did this, this, this. I feel like you're, intentionally hurting me. We'll talk about thoughts. And there's a really big difference between that and saying I feel hurt. I feel sad. I feel disappointed. I feel angry. So very first step in any type of communication is an I feel statement with an emotion. The second is when you, and this is where you give specific detailed evidence about what it was that this person did. So this applies more to conflict type situations actually than if you're kind of requesting something out of nowhere. But so you'll say when you did this specific thing, and if you want to be more detailed, at this specific time. So over our lunch break. The third step is you say because it, and this is where you talk about how it impacted you, how it impacted your relationship with this person. And then finally, the fourth step, after you've said how you feel emotionally, you've given them the specific details as to what you're talking about, you've talked about how it's impacted you and their relationship, this is where you say what you're requesting. If you're wanting an apology, if you're wanting them to change a certain thing in the future. And again, being assertive and being understanding that other people have every right to choose how they communicate with us, we need to understand that what we're asking for in this fourth step might not be given to us. This is where we need to be open to compromise. Or if we're not open to compromise, understanding that even though we request it from someone, they may not give it to us. And then, that follows with a bunch of extra reflection that we might need to do about the relationship. But so those are the basic bones of it. So I'm going to go through two examples quickly. One is I feel upset, so I'm labeling the emotion, when you ignored my text messages for the entire day. So it's being specific to the context, to the timeline, because it makes me think that you aren't interested in our friendship. So I'm explaining how it's impacted my understanding of the relationship. And then 4, this is where I'm asking for something. I would like you to let me know if you're busy so I know not to expect a response. And again, this person might say, okay, well, if I am busy, then I can't send that text to say I'm busy, right? And so maybe that then springs a bigger conversation about when this person can expect to talk by text and how, the initial person can maybe feel less upset or less neglected in the friendship. Another example, I feel angry and sad. So again, 2 emotional words, anger and sadness. When you told me to just look for other jobs, so it's quoting back this specific thing that this other person said, because it seemed like my work concerns were being dismissed and I really wanted a space to talk about my work issues. I would like you to ask me if I want advice before you offer it in the future. So you're starting with the emotional statement, you're listing the specific behavior, you're talking about how it impacted you, and then you're going in for the request. So that's the 4-step formula for assertive communication. I hope it was helpful, and I'm happy to go through more examples. If any of you would like, just let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you guys on another episode of Baldwin Breakdowns.